Hello and welcome back to PolyToots. In this video we're continuing with the modeling of this Jeep and we'll be covering the seats, steering wheel, dash, gear levers, pedals, front plate, chassis, the bumper, blah 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 blah. So for the seats, we already have a general idea of where they'll go because it's a Jeep and that's pretty obvious. So we'll start with a simple cube, just scale and squish it down until it looks a bit right. Hopping into X-ray mode as well to make sure I'm roughly in the right area. Now we'll press Shift D to create a new one, rotate it around and position it. Then get yourself into a top view and just slide it across to where it needs to be. Remember to apply the scale with Ctrl and A, and we'll also apply the rotation on this as well because why not? With both of these selected, I'll hit Ctrl J to join them and also hit F2 to rename it. I'll call it Seat for obvious reasons. Now back to edit mode, edges, and press A to select them all, and then Ctrl B to add in a slight bevel. Then I'm going to add in 2 loop cuts onto this backrest part. Again, that's Ctrl R, then scroll the mouse wheel. And I'll just push these back for a bit of a nice curve. Right click and shade smooth to make it all AAA. As for what's holding these in place, if we check the reference, it looks like some primitive pipework, I guess, just running around the edges. I'm also noticing that the back cushion doesn't match with what I've done, so I'll come here and by hovering over the object and pressing L, we can select the entire element. Then I'll hold Control and box select the top part here to deselect it. Now I can just move the bottom section up a bit. Let's reduce the visual clutter here by pressing the / key to bring us into an isolated view. Now in edge mode, I'm going to do something similar to the way we approach the windshield, but instead of taking a single vert and extruding it for the edge, we're going to use the existing edges on these cushions to give us a head start. So make a selection like this, pretty much where the pipes would go, then press Shift D to duplicate, but we don't actually want to move them, so right click to cancel the movement. Then press P to separate. Tab back into object mode, select the object we just copied from this mesh, then back into edit mode, and where we have a gap in the edges here, just grab the 2 verts and press M and merge at center. Then we'll grab the 2 verts at the end here and press E to extrude, lock it to the Z axis, and then E and X to extrude it this way. And I don't really know how far down or across to go here, so we'll press the / key again to exit isolation mode. And yeah, we can tell pretty much immediately that the gearbox area will have to be tweaked a bit, but I also want to make sure these edges are closer to the floor. So I'm just going into X-ray to easily select them, and then coming out of X-ray to move them, which gives a clearer view for when it will clip through the floor. I'll also grab these 2 verts here and do a bevel with Ctrl Shift B, using the mouse wheel to give myself more segments. Lastly, grab either of the 2 open verts at the back, press E to extrude it, and holding the Control key, I'll just snap it over to the other side. Back into isolation mode with / just to make sure that the shape looks correct, and I'll also select all the verts by pressing A, then M, and merge by distance. Now we can tab into object mode, right click, and convert it to a curve. Try giving it a little depth and then exit isolation, again with the / just to see it with more context and make whatever tweaks you want. Then let's convert this back to a mesh with the right click option. Then with the frame still selected, I'll shift click on the seat and press Ctrl and J to join these together. Now for the opposite seat, we will use a mirror modifier again, but this time we'll use the main body of the Jeep as the symmetry point. So at the mirror modifier, choose the correct axis, and then where it says mirror object, use the eyedropper and select the main body. Now the seat is mirrored based on the origin point of the Jeep. Speaking of the main body, let's get back into edit mode on that and just tweak the shape of it so it's not clipping through our seat so much. We have lost our AAA rating on these seats due to the frames, so let's right click on it in object mode again and select shade smooth. Now just one more seat, the one at the back, and this is going to be crazy quick because if we check the reference here, there's not a whole lot happening. It kind of just looks like we could use a wider version of the seat that we already made. So let's do that. In edit mode, we'll select all the elements of the seat, press Shift D and drag it back. I'll also lift it up a bit so the frame isn't clipping through the floor. Then press P to separate. It still has the mirror modifier, which is handy. Tab into object mode, select only the new copy, and let's get into isolate mode again with /, then back into edit mode. I need to add in a loop cut down the center of this chair, so that's one on this cushion, one on the top cushion, and don't forget about the frame too, so one down below and one up top. Remember, you need to right click after the first left click to keep the loop cut dead center. Now select half of this chair and then X and delete faces. Let's get out of isolated mode now and move the seat inward. Then we'll grab all the verts on the edge and just drag those across to the middle. I'll also select all these loops, drag them in a bit and do a cheeky bevel. I also want to raise this back cushion up even higher, just like what we did on the front seat. Onto the steering wheel next, and again, just checking the reference, looks like a really simple piece. So we'll Shift A and add in a torus. I'll change these settings to something that I think is appropriate for the detail level of this Jeep so far, but obviously if you want to push it further, then be my guest. Once you've got that, just move, scale, and rotate it into place. And then I'll also come into the top view and move it across. Friendly reminder, because I'm never going to stop mentioning this, but because we scaled it in object mode, we should use Ctrl and A and apply the scale. I'll also shape this smooth as well. Now for the inner pieces, I'm going to reuse the same trick we've already done before by selecting these three verts in a triangle formation. Press E to extrude, and again, because we don't want to move them anywhere, we'll right click to place them back where they were. Then press Alt and S to scale and drag them in toward the center. Then we'll switch into edge mode, select the three new edges, P to separate them out, then into object mode and select them so we can convert it into a curve. Then the exact same deal as before, just go down to the bevel section under geometry in the data panel and give it some depth. I am noticing we're going to get some gaps here where they meet with the wheel, so tap into edit mode, grab these 3 points and just scale them outward a bit so it intersects with the wheel. Now I want to give it a little taper, and using Alt S on curve points like this will actually thicken or thin the depth in that area. This might be confusing because when it was a mesh, we used Alt S to scale them in on the normals, but when it's a curve, Alt S controls the depth. You get used to it. Now back into object mode and convert this back to a mesh. Then join it to the wheel with Ctrl J. I'll also hit F2 to give it a better name. Now we just need the pole that goes all the way down, which will be a cylinder, but rather than trying to position and rotate it manually and hope we get it close enough, we can be smarter. So add in a cylinder, give it whatever segments you want, and just make it thinner. No need to be exact because we'll tweak it afterwards. Then shift select the wheel and come over to the transform menu here on the item panel. Press T if you've accidentally hidden this. Then right click anywhere on the X, Y, or Z position and choose copy all to selected. Then do the same on the rotation as well. This just inherits the selected transforms that the wheel had. Now we can get into edit mode and tweak away. Again, I'm going to be pressing G twice to move the verts like this along the edges, and I can't really tell where's a good spot in X-ray mode, so I'll come out of that. This is where using the Alt key while you're moving things with GG comes in handy, in that I can send it back the other way. This does look a bit thick to me, so I'll select everything with A and use Alt S to thin it out. Then I'll select this top face, extrude it out just a little bit, then scale it in a touch, then one more extrude just to create this, whatever it is, safety hazard if you ask me. I do have some clipping going on in the dash a tiny bit, but I'm okay with that amount. On our actual reference, there is a chunk that's cut out of the dash specifically for this, but of course we're using the mirror modifier right now, so any change I make on this side would be duplicated on the other. You definitely could look at changing this later when you're all done with the mirroring, but for this level of detail that we're going for, it's not really worth it. Let's add a few instruments on the dash next, and one easy way to just plop down a few primitives where we want them is with this button over here. It looks like a regular menu to add in primitives, but these puppies come with the ability to be generated on surfaces. So with the cylinder option selected, just click and drag on the dash, use Shift to keep the shape consistent, then release the mouse button and drag out a bit of thickness. Click once to apply it. So now there's a little cylinder here, roughly where we want it, and even angled to the surface as well. Pretty cool. I'll just tab into edit mode to make this a bit thinner though, making sure to tab back into object mode afterwards. Now I want to duplicate one of these underneath, and as you might expect, if we just try to move it down, it's going to clip through the dash because of the slope. You could just drag it back out again, that's not a problem, totally legal thing to do. But while we can move, scale, and rotate things on an axis lock, we can also lock a local axis as well. Pressing an axis direction twice will switch it to local mode. This only works if your object actually has rotation though, otherwise the local would be the same as the global. Now Shift D to duplicate these across, and I'll also duplicate one more for a big centerpiece which needs to be scaled. But as you can tell, scaling this just sort of sends it into the dash, and this is because of the origin point of the object, which is sat out here. And so this is where things are being scaled from. There's a few ways around this, but the most surefire fix is to just change the origin, which you can do in this options dropdown up here. I highly recommend adding the origin option to your quick favorites. Enabling this allows us to move the origin point of the object, which I'll just drag back a bit on the X. We just want to be able to scale this up without it flying away. Make sure you disable the effect only origins, by the way. Now we can scale this up all nice and easy. I'm going to give this a bit more geometry since it's bigger. So in edge mode, if you hold Control Alt and click on an edge, it will select all the edge rings, then just do a bevel. I'll duplicate this one more time and bring it up here, scale it down a bit, and even though it's smaller, I still want to keep the bevel we did because there's like two little nubbly things on the reference and I have no idea what they are, but they look like they deserve the extra geometry. So with GG and holding Alt, I'll drag this face outward a bit. Then I'll just extrude and scale until it's rounded off a bit. Then copy it over to the other side and you're done. Almost. As one last thing, I'll just select all of these and Control J to join. If you want to tackle a few more pieces on the dash, be my guest, but for the tutorial, we're going to move on to the gear levers next. We'll start the same way we did the dash pieces, but we'll use the cone option this time. Again, we use Shift to keep the aspect fixed, release the mouse, and drag up the height. I'll lower the segments on this and also change the second radius so it has a bit of a flat cap. Once you're happy and you know it, duplicate this across and scale it down. Put it in place and then duplicate another one. We are running out of space on this, so just move, scale, and tweak it until it doesn't look stupid. That's professional advice, by the way. You can put that on a t-shirt with a fancy font and quotation marks. Let's join all of these together, and then using / to go into isolation mode, I'm going to remove the three faces underneath, as we'll never see them. To be fair, we should have done this on the dash as well, and I probably will, just off camera. Exit isolation, select these top three faces and press I to inset, then M to merge and choose collapse. Then we'll grab those three collapse verts and pull them up a bit. Next we'll do my apparently favorite thing and press E to extrude these verts into three edges. Then grab them and separate them into their own object. Now just move the points around a bit to something more natural. And for the larger lever, we'll extrude it out once more, grab the corner vert and Control Shift B to bevel the vertices. Then just convert it to a curve and add the depth as per usual. The only thing to remember here is what mode you need to be in, which will be obvious if you try to right-click in edit mode and realize there's no option to convert. These areas here are not quite right, and that's because the edge is straight. So we can come into edit mode, grab those points and extrude them down. For the larger lever, we don't need to extrude, just grab it and move it down. Remember to convert this back to a mesh. And now for something completely new. We're going to talk about Blender's 3D cursor, but only a tiny bit because I genuinely don't like it, but it has some nice features. One of them is any object you spawn will spawn at the location of the 3D cursor. And if we make a selection like these faces and press Shift S and choose cursor to selected, it will move the 3D cursor to the center of your selection. Now any object we add will be added right here. So while we're still in edit mode, we're going to add in a new object, and I'll choose the icosphere. And of course it comes in massive, so let's change the radius on that and we are basically done. Just repeat the same thing for the other two levers. Select these faces, Shift S, cursor to selected, Shift A, add an icosphere. It remembers the last settings, so this is the same size as what we just done. I'll also lower the resolution a bit though, because these are smaller and less important, and I'm really cheap with my polygons. Don't forget to rename this so you're not lost in a sea of random object names later. And because we added these spheres in edit mode, they're already a part of this object. The bases aren't though, so let's select those, Shift select the levers and join them up with Control J. Just realized I never renamed the dash pieces either, so let's do that. And there's a random cylinder in the list, which happens to be from the steering wheel, so we'll just join that up to the wheel itself. And as usual, we'll also give it some auto smooth shading. The pace of this tutorial is about to change. I'll briefly remind you of hotkeys here and there, and of course I'll introduce new concepts with explanations, but from the things we've already done like 10 times over, the explanations will stop. So onto some basic pedals. I'm just reusing one of these lever pieces we have, duplicating it across and separating it out as its own object. I kind of hate how far away the origin is from this though, so in object mode we'll go to object, set origin and choose origin to geometry. And make sure it's set to bounds center in this little pop-up. So I'm completely eyeballing the angle here, just want something quick that looks right enough. Then I'll bring the 3D cursor to this selection of verts and spawn in a cube, which will be massive, so I'll scale it down. Then it's just a case of scaling, moving, and rotating this until it looks something like what a pedal would look like. I'm doing all this in edit mode, by the way. Even adding the cube was in edit mode, so this is all one object. Then we'll just duplicate this one across to the other side. And for the accelerator, I'll duplicate out an existing face from this pedal, and then just scale and move it around until it fits a bit better. I am checking my reference for this, but detailing this part is not a major concern of mine. So long as we have the general shapes, that should be fine. When I'm done with just that single face, I'll extrude it back a bit. And as you can see, we've got flipped normals on this piece, like we're looking inside it. The reason we can even see this is because we enabled backface culling in the first video. If it was disabled, you wouldn't know that there was an issue here at all. To fix it, with the edge selected, or vert or face, doesn't matter, we'll press L to select the entire element, and then Alt N to open the normals menu and choose flip. Lastly, just going to grab a few of these edge rings and give them a little bevel with one extra segment, and that will do nicely. Okay, so just a few more pieces left until we can call the base of this model done, but one big one is some of the details on the front. It's a truly iconic part of the Jeep, and if we check the reference, there's a fair bit going on here in terms of geometry we're going to need for these holes. But we don't really want to just come here and start adding in loads of loops, as we're going to end up with just a ton of extra geometry that we just have no need for. So I'll undo that. And if we look at the reference again, it's quite obvious that this is a separate piece from the bonnet. It's like a thick piece of plate metal with holes cut out of it. And if you remember the rule from before, if it's separate in real life, then it's separate in 3D. And so that's how we'll treat it. First of all, I'm going to straighten up these faces, as we'd included the bonnet poking out in this shape, but we'll handle that on its own now. So I'll press S, X for the axis, and 0 to straighten it all out. Then we'll inset the faces a touch with I, and just like we did on the interior base, we'll select the faces on the edge, X to remove them, and then select to drag the edges to the center, which again only works because we have clipping enabled on the modifier. Now we'll separate this piece out, tap into object mode, and give it a new name. Back to the main body for a second. We want to grab the faces up here and give them a little extrusion. Then for this corner piece sticking out, we'll select the outer vert, then the inside one, press M and choose at last. And same again for the opposite two. Now we've got that profile shape back. Now if we go back to the front plate, we've got the freedom to add in as much geometry as we want without it being a hassle for the rest of the body. So let's grab this loop first and straighten it out by scaling it on the Y by 0, then moving it across to the end of where these holes will be. There's also an edge loop here that we really don't need, so I'll select it, press X, and then choose Dissolve Edges. The difference between deleting and dissolving is if we'd have chosen delete, then we'd be left with a hole in our mesh. Dissolve will essentially try to get rid of the selected geometry while keeping everything else intact. There's also an odd little vertex up here which serves no purpose, so I'll dissolve that too. Then give myself a loop cut on the left side, and using Control, I'll align it with this corner vert on the right. Then select the two verts and press J to create an edge between them. This is optional, but it's just cleaner. Then just make sure these other edges here are straight. They could be, but they look wonky to me, so I'll move them up and hold Control to align it with the verts on the right. So now we've got some obvious sections. You can tell that this area here is where the vent holes will be, this section for the light, and then, while it's not perfect, this last hole down here. It'll be fine once we start cutting into it though, trust me. We're going to go with booleans to tackle this, which is not something game artists usually want to touch due to the tidy up involved afterwards, but there's two reasons we should use them here. The first is that this is a low poly enough model that the tidy up isn't going to be that bad. You'll see what I mean in a bit. And secondly, this is a tutorial and it's something new to show you, so that's cool. So we're going to need a new object in the shape of the holes that we want to cut out. I'll just duplicate these faces, pull them out, and separate them into their own object and rename it something obvious. Now we can add in a loop cut and use the mouse wheel to give us 4 extra segments. Then a bevel with Control B. We did say we'd need 4.5 of these vent holes though, so add in 1 extra loop on the left there. Now we can select and delete the in-between faces, which leaves us with a clearer picture of what we'll be using for the boolean, but we're not done yet. I'm going to add an extra loop in the middle of the 4 vents. We don't need to do this for the one in the middle since it already has a middle loop. Then I'll select only the corner verts for each vent piece and scale them on the Z. This is still a bit too low poly looking for my taste, so we'll select the middle edges we added in and give them a bevel. You'll notice that we can't do this for the center edge, like the one that's being mirrored. So we'll just need to patch this one up manually by adding in a loop cut, grabbing these top 2 verts, S, Z, and 0 to straighten them out, then move them on the Z and align them with the verts on the other vent. Do the same for the bottom verts as well, straighten out, move, and snap. We can grab all the faces now and extrude them. And it doesn't really matter which way we do this since we can always flip the normals after, but since the position of this object doesn't matter yet, we might as well extrude it the right way and save us some extra clicks later. Back to object mode now. Our origin point is far away and this usually bothers me, but this is a temporary object, so let's try our best to ignore that and just drag this new object inside of the front plate, making sure the geometry is clipping all the way through it. Now let's actually do some magic. Select the main body of the Jeep and go to the modifiers panel and search for boolean. Then, where it wants an object, just use the eyedropper tool and pick the vent shapes we just made. It's hard to tell that anything really happened, but if we come up here and hide our boolean piece, you will see the fruits of your labor. You'll notice though that when you tab into edit mode, they disappear. We can press this little button on the modifier to make it appear while in edit mode, but we can't directly alter the topology yet. One other cool thing is that since this is a modifier, we can actually select the Boolean mesh itself, edit it a bit, and you'll see the changes reflected on your model. That was just an example, though I don't actually want to do that. So anyway, as I was saying, we can't really tidy up any of this geometry because the Boolean is being driven by a modifier. We need to actually apply it so it becomes a permanent change to the mesh. We do this either by pressing Ctrl and A while hovering over a modifier or using the little drop down here. Worth noting that some modifiers can't be applied while you're still in edit mode, so you'll need to hop back to object mode to do it. Once that's applied and you tab back into edit mode, you'll see that we can now interact with these cutout verts. So it's time for the tidy up, unfortunately. I am very much a believer that good topology is just any that gets the job done, but I have my limits. The tidy up here involves trying to add back in a bunch of loops or manual triangulation so you don't just have these seemingly blank edged faces with loads of verts connected to them. So we'll start with the loop cut up here, and we'll try to match the segments with the amount of verts that we need to join up from the top of the vents, which is 9. I told you I can count. Now we can select 2 verts at a time and press J to connect up the edges. Just keep doing this until things start looking more organized. And if you're using the move gizmo like I am and trying to box select new verts, just move the ones you already had selected, you can just swap out of the gizmo and into box select or something like that with this button here. I'll also do the same down here so we end up with some nice quads. You don't have to quad everything, by the way, despite what your teacher or lecturer keeps telling you. Also, yes, I know I missed an edge here. So we'll do the exact same thing on the bottom face here as well, adding in 9 segments and just connecting in some edges wherever it makes sense. Lastly, just use J on these corner verts as well to add an edge that links across to the corner of this other face. Now we can use the Alt Shift and click to select all the inside loops here, and this is where that edge that I missed has presented itself, in that it's not allowing me to complete the loop selection because the topology isn't clearly defined. So we'll just go back and fix that up real quick, then back to edges and reselect the loops of the insides. One thing I'm not sure if I've mentioned yet, but you can press A twice to deselect everything. It's optional, but it's become a habit of mine. So with those selected, let's press E to extrude them back a bit. When you're happy with the placement, press F to add faces. In real life, this is obviously just where a hole would be, and we'd see a bunch of other stuff behind these vents. But this is a low detail Jeep we're making, so it's not like we're going to add in the engine back there. This next bit is completely optional, but I do want to add just a small bevel to the outside of these vents so they're not as sharp looking. So I'm grabbing all the edges again and doing a bevel. And you'll notice the shading is getting pretty horrible. We could try to fix that up with the auto smooth modifier that we already have, but instead I'll get rid of that. Make sure the object is set to shade smooth instead, meaning single smoothing for the whole model. Then just mark these edges as sharp. Then select all the faces inside here, press 2 to convert the selection to edges, and right-click Mark Sharp. Done. And again, completely optional. Now just 2 more booleans to do here, and we'll use the Shift-S cursor to selection trick on this face, so we can then add a cylinder where we want it. It comes in massive, of course. Adjust your segments to something more in line with the rest of the model, then just scale, rotate, and place this object where we want to cut. Then just like last time, select the front plate object, add a Boolean modifier, and choose the new cylinder we just added in. And since I know there's no reason for this to not work, I'll just immediately apply the modifier. I'll also rename the cylinder just to keep track. We can 100% discard these objects that we're making in order to cut the shapes out, but until we're actually done, it's best just to keep them there just in case you need to redo anything. So this one does look a bit trickier to clean up, but don't stress over it too much. We just want to weld down any verts that aren't contributing to the shape, which we can do with things like the M key and merging, and also add in edges where we can, which in some cases may require adding more geometry elsewhere. One handy little hotkey to help with this is Shift-R, which will repeat any last action you made. So since I used the merge at last option, now I can just select my 2 verts and press Shift R, just so long as I make sure the last vert selected is the one I want to keep. Then, as usual, it's the J key to connect an edge between 2 verts. As I mentioned a long time ago, it's not super important on flat meshes that don't deform, but it's a good habit to get into. If you're super new to 3D, I don't expect you to know what makes sense and what doesn't, and that's fine. It's not a blocker. You can still do whatever you want, and you'll learn on the way. We still have one more hole to add, so I'll leave the tidy up there for now and move on to the headlight part itself, which we can start by extruding this interior loop back. And looking at the reference, it does go back a fair bit. Now we'll extrude this loop again, but right-click to keep it in the original position, then S to scale. Then another extrusion, for me that's on the X, just a little bit. Then scale it a little, and then the same again. We're just making a rounded shape here. Lastly, we'll just M to merge this selection and choose Collapse. And now for the smoothing, same as before, select the edges you want to be sharp and right-click, mark sharp. And that's it. We just repeat this process exactly to add in the last hole underneath. The topology will get a bit trickier to tidy up as this was an odd area to begin with, but it's nothing you can't handle with what you've already learned. You are, the master of this geometry. You can dissolve edges, merge vertices, create new edges. That's pretty much all there is to it. You try it first to use the geometry that you already have, and if you can't, then, add in some cuts, tidy it up, simple. As a minor last point, since this hole is actually for some sort of bolt for holding the plate in place, I do want to add in a little basic detail, which will just be a box that's inside it. I'm adding this cube while staying in edit mode, so it's not creating a new separate object. If you wanted to do it as a separate object and just join it later, then, that's also a solid idea. I know you're probably scanning down at the timeline right now, seeing how much time has passed and how much time is left. It's a long tutorial, and I know that there's also another video still to go, but in terms of completing the base shape, that there's just one more thing left to do. So we're really close, and then after that, it'll just be some fun little props that we'll just be adding in. So it's okay. It's okay. We can do this. So the last thing will be the chassis. I'm not actually 100% sure how to pronounce that. I think I was right. But yeah, if we add this in, that will also allow us to get the front bumper in, which again, I think is quite iconic, and also just make a few corrections to the overall shape. To begin with, we obviously need to know roughly what this thing looks like. And again, that's where our reference will come into play. This wasn't on the original image that we brought into Blender, but it is available at the same link in the description. So let's start by adding in a cylinder and bump down the segments. Then we can scale it roughly to the sort of thickness that we want and rotate it by 90 degrees. We want this to be dead center to our tire, so with it selected, let's shift click on the tire and then right click on any position field and choose copy all to select it. Now, selecting only the axle piece here, let's get into edit mode and delete the caps. Then select all the faces and just drag it across. Make sure you're not creeping over the center of the Jeep because we will be using a mirror modifier for this too. Again, we'll choose the body of the Jeep as the mirror point and make sure you set the correct axis. Then as usual, enable clipping and drag the verts into the center. Back into object mode and we'll right click shade smooth. Then duplicate with Shift D, and it doesn't matter where you put this because we'll shift select the back tire and use the copy all to selected method again to line it up. Then just select both of these and hit Ctrl J to join. Now onto the side parts, which will run down the underside of the Jeep. I'm just starting off with the cube and scaling it down and squishing it in a bit so it's not completely square. Then as I'm working out where to position it exactly, I noticed that the front plate is a little low down. So as a slight detour, we need to select both the front plate and the main body, then tab into edit mode and just shift these verts up a bit. Back to the box. We'll grab one end and just drag it all the way down to the back of the Jeep and then raise it up a tiny bit as well. And now back into object mode, so we can also select these two wheels, then isolate the selection with /. Grab just the cube again and back into edit mode. Now we just want to add in a couple of loops. One for the center-ish of each wheel, and then 2 more for each wheel roughly where they start and end. No need to be precise with this. I'm double tapping A now to just deselect everything, then using the Alt, Shift and click to select the entire loop of these 2 edges. Give them both a bevel with Control B and then move them up a bit. From here we can exit isolation mode and then just move some of these loops around to a better point. I don't really know exactly what I'm doing here, but I figure it's got to look something like this. For the front bumper, we'll just Control D to duplicate this face out from here. Then just scale that a bit, move some edges into position, and before you move this too far across, we'll add a mirror modifier. And again, we'll use the main body as the mirror point and enable clipping. Now we can grab the outer edges here and extrude them back to give us some thickness. Then select the back 2 opposite edges and press F to add a face in there. Remember, we can press L to select entire elements, and with that, I'll just shift this whole thing back a bit. I'll also grab these faces from the chassis and just move them up a bit. From here, we'll handle what I can only assume is some sort of suspension system, but I genuinely don't know. I'm not a car guy. I have no idea why I thought making this would be a good idea, but anyway, same approach for what we just did. We'll grab this face and Shift D to duplicate it out. I will separate this one out as its own object, which we do with the P key. Then getting back into edit mode on this new piece, we'll scale it down a bit and then just sync it into the geometry above. Into X-ray mode now and side view. And still with this face selected in edit mode, we'll hold the Control key down and right click where we want to extrude. Honestly, a really nice feature, this one. So just continue that until you have this curved shape going from one end of the wheel to the other. Again, that's with a face selected. You hold the Control key and then just right click somewhere on the screen. When you're done, select the whole element and duplicate it down to the back tires. From here, it's just tiny little tweaks, like moving and rotating some loops around, adding in a bevel here and there to try and avoid the clipping, but honestly, it's not essential stuff. Let's add in a center piece here by using our old friend Control and R to do a loop cut. Middle mouse wheel up to get an extra segment. Then we can select this face here and extrude it across. And even though we have clipping enabled on the mirror modifier, it won't automatically remove any faces that you've got sat like right in the center. So for instances like this, try to remember to remove the inside faces. Tiny little tweak to the shape, no idea what I'm doing, but it looks good. Lastly, let's get another cylinder in here. I think I actually went a bit too low with these segments, and I'll probably be a terrible person and update it when I'm not recording. But either way, the most important thing is to get yourself a cylinder, scale and rotate and position it to about here on the axle. Then in edit mode, scale this face up a bit, then extrude it and scale it down. Then press I to inset and extrude this last little piece all the way to the center, and you'll probably need to just move it in a bit too. Press L to grab all the faces, duplicate it across, and then do an R, Z, and 180 to rotate it 180 on the Z, and then just put it in place. And because I forgot to do this earlier, let's go back to the front plate real quick, get into edit mode, and move these verts on the last vent hole up a bit. That's been bothering me for ages. The topology is now pretty weird though, but we can tidy it up a bit and give it some breathing room, I guess, if geometry needs that. Let's also dissolve this edge that is really being pushed to its limits, and instead we'll reorient the flow here by selecting these 2 verts and pressing J. I think that will wrap it up for this video. So in the next and final part of the modeling, we'll be covering the props of this Jeep. So the blackout headlight, the shovel, the axe, jerry can, exhaust, and a few handles and whatever else that we can tackle. So yeah, I'll see you in the next one.